Ron Stewart is a fantasy football analyst who's done work at Player Profiler and who creates YouTube videos in his basement. His channel has 60,000 subscribers. He's a data nerd, a diehard Jets fan, and he's everyone's favorite pizza guy. These are his late round perspectives. This episode is sponsored by Underdog. Underdog is the easiest place to play fantasy sports, and they give you a ton of different games and contests to choose from each week. If you think drafting is over because the season started, you'd be wrong. You can draft teams over there each week in literal minutes. Right now, if you sign up on Underdog with promo code LATEROUND, you not only get a deposit offer of up to $1,000, but you also get access to my rest of season rankings. Those will be emailed to you once you sign up. But when you sign up, you have to use promo code LATEROUND. Head to UnderdogFantasy.com or download the app to do so. Again, that's promo code LATEROUND. Now back to the show.
A little messy in the background. I've been talking about this on videos recently, but my whole my basement's out of sorts right now. So the basement I refer to all the time is getting work done. It's getting excavated. It's a whole big thing.
Where have you been recording? Where did you have to shift headquarters to?
Here, but everything that was on this side of the room is now on this side of the room. The lights and all the fancy stuff that was behind me before. Like, you can see the Underdog signs like just sitting to the side now. It's a sad state of affairs, but we're here.
No, I think it looks better than 99% of fantasy analysts in their situation. This is the first year that I upgraded the camera, got the backdrop going a little bit more, and I get comments on it now all the time. Whereas before, I mean, like, I think the standard is just like, a pretty basic webcam that people just throw up there and then they just start chatting with. But I think like you're still definitely in like the 98th percentile for fantasy analysts right now, man.
Yeah, I'll take that. I think it's just because, all my stuff is on YouTube. I know that you're, you started on podcasts and stuff. I'm bad about getting every single video into audio to then post. So my audio listeners sometimes get left behind. But yeah, I make sure at least the quality is here. But the backdrop, it's here or there.
What are the you got Namath back there? Who's the other one?
The other one is Martin Brodeur.
Marty Brodeur. I like it. I like it. So you're a Devils fan, a Jets fan, and then who else are you following? Are you like a Mets fan?
Seton Hall Pirates, baby.
Seton Hall Pirates. I think you're the only. Did you go to Seton Hall, or is this just I grew up around Seton Hall kind of thing?
I grew up around Seton Hall. They play at the same arena as the Devils in Newark, so it's just like I'm there all the time, anyways. And my one of my best friends, he goes to Seton Hall. So he would just take me to all the games like his freshman, sophomore year, and then of course like COVID killed one or two of those.
Have you are you like diehard following Seton Hall, or like the same way that you are like the Jets and Devils?
I would say this, like Jets, I literally tell people like when Jets games go on, like just don't look at my tweets, please. Like that's top tier. That is, I would die for this team. And then like a small tier break to like Devils and Seton Hall. But like I'm fairly on top of things. Like I can tell you like one of their best players, like Dylan Adewusu or something like that. Like there's like the most obscure players. They got a recruit coming in from Ohio State, so I can go pretty. Shaheen Holloway played for Seton Hall, and he's the coach now, and he's really cool. And he was the head coach for the St. Peter's team that went on the run.
Right.
So then they poached him as like an alumni. So we're fired up. We actually had the number one transfer poached from Seton Hall to go to St. John's with Rick Pitino. So that's some college basketball for you there.
Man,
I'll make sure I'm at that game when he comes back home. I'll tell you that much.
Look, like there are worse basketball programs to follow than Seton Hall, to be fair. I went to Pitt. I'm a Pitt alum. I feel like, Pitt. I mean, I was at Pitt when we were a 1 seed consistently in the NCAA tournament. Like I was at like peak Pitt athletics when I was there. We had like DeJuan Blair and Levance Fields and Sam Young, and it was amazing. But yeah, man, I can respect it. You got your squad, and at least you're not like a Carolina or a Duke fan just because,
Yeah, those guys also end up being like Yankees fans, Lakers fans. Like, I got a cousin who went to Duke, but Yeah, the NIL is kind of fun now, though. Like Rutgers has 2 5-stars, which is, they're technically my rivals as Seton Hall fan,
Sure.
but I don't really care. Like anybody in Jersey, I kind of root for.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not rooting for Duke or the big guys. The NIL is a fun twist these days.
Yeah, for sure. I do love throwing out the random tweets, like when Carolina does well or something, like wins a national title, just sending like a tweet out that says like Yankees fans are celebrating everywhere, stuff like that. But yeah, anyway, so look, you've been doing a lot of stuff now in the how long have you been doing stuff in the fantasy space now?
I first started writing articles for Player Profiler. I was actually pulling up, I was looking at the show sheet. I was pulling up an old, like one of my first articles I ever wrote was like June of 2020. So that's what, like probably like 4 years here coming up in terms of like just on YouTube, like about 4 years. But yeah, man, it's very, it's not something that I look up and really think about, if that makes sense. Like I was kind of just looking back and like, yeah, like it's been, I'm trying to find my oldest video here. Yeah, 4 years ago, 2020 fantasy football season.
So you and I connected fairly early on, right? Whenever we did we did a show with the ship chasing guys, didn't we? Isn't that
we did
first met each other?
The Dynasty rookie kind of like round table that Overset does.
That's right. And so what made you do that? What made you, because like not only are you doing this fantasy content, but you're also doing a lot of it on YouTube, as you've said. And I come from like the previous generation of analysts who started, I started in 2011, 2012, and everyone was on Twitter. That's just what you did, right? And I think it's just become a thing where, it's easy. Like sports commentary happens on Twitter still, like there's a lot of it that's going on, and every analyst you see on television and media person is going to have a Twitter account to some degree. But we've obviously seen shifts in social over the last 15 years of, you don't have to just be on Twitter to, be able to grow an audience and be able to do this, for a living or make money doing this. And so, I personally, I'm trying to at least do more and more on YouTube and stuff like that. It's not my number one priority because I have the podcast and stuff that's a little bit more important. But what made you focus on YouTube, and what made you go out and start analyzing fantasy football?
Yeah, if you want kind of like the real origin, it's I've always been the guy, like I've had it's one of my favorite parts of the off season is I'll be doing streams and I'll have like high school buddies that I haven't talked to in like a year or two, like pop in or whatever, because I was the kid. I was the degenerate kid in the locker room. Like every spring, I'm getting March Madness bids in. We got a bracket coming. Like, where's the $5, bud? Like, I'm a freshman running these. Same with fantasy football. We got like 12 people. I'm running it. I'm the commissioner of my home league. But I wasn't very good at first. Like my first year that I played, we would play like in middle school, and I remember like drafting Gronk super high, but like we wouldn't, like there was no money on the line, nothing really there, but it was just fun to do. I grew up loving Madden, loving football, loving the Jets, obviously. Shout out Mark Sanchez and Rex Ryan. And then really as we got older, I was like, I'm done. I took, if I remember the draft correctly, I took like Lamar Miller and D-Hop in my first 2 picks when the Texans completely tanked. That was like the D-Hop down year in like year 3 or 4.
Right. Yeah.
My team sucked, and I was like, you know what? I'm never going to finish like bottom 3 again. So I was doing research, like was taking it seriously, looking at like NFL Network. I've told Matt Harmon I was actually, I had him on a while back. I was like, dude, like I used to watch you on NFL Network as like a kid. Like, it would come on before football practice.
And Harmon's younger than me, dude. Now I feel really old. Good Lord.
That was it. Like, because that was before like podcast. I mean, there was some podcasts, of course, but like, like the TV was huge. Sure. So I'd watch him, Fabiano, everything like that. And then college happens, or really was more, I also then got into listening to podcasts, which is kind of full circle. I would listen to your stuff in high school. I know that's not going to make you feel great. I would listen to Player Profiler at the time, and I actually reached out to Matt Kelly at the time. I was like, hey, I want to help out. But I was like a junior in high school. He came back with like something to do, and then I like chickened out. But then pretty much what happens is, I go to college. I was supposed to go to Rutgers. Then the first bill came, and I was like, nah, I'm actually going to go to community college. Thank you. So I went to community college. COVID then hits, and I'm sitting there with like all the time in the world, and I'm like, man, I kind of just wanted to revisit it, right, from like junior year in high school. I still loved fantasy football. It just was never really a thing that I could do. So I started writing articles. And I think what it came down to for me was just I was writing articles, and they were doing fine, but I was just like, man, and I don't want to do this to discourage any writers out there, but I was like, man, I could be the greatest writer of all time, and I'm not sure how long I'd have to do this for me to ever be anybody at this point in time. Right? This is like 2020. Like, it's pretty maxed out at that point in terms of writing. So then I was like, I looked up to guys like, of course, like you and everything in the podcast space, but it really did seem like YouTube was huge. I also grew up in the time of YouTube where, I don't know if you're going to even recognize these names, but like, I loved like Smosh growing up. Like, we're talking like 07, 08 YouTube, and like kind of like Freddie was on there. I grew up on YouTube. So honestly, content was always something I wanted to do on camera. When Vine first came out, I had like a couple of really dumb Vines that I was making. And just like, I've always been someone that has been on camera, just not to a real capacity. So I was just like, you know what? It's COVID. I'm not going to have to face the music of however bad this, looks, because we're all locked up inside. And I made the videos. They did okay. And kind of the funny full circle part of this is I probably would have quit. And also, you'll see like my Twitter bio is like delivering pizzas by night, whatever. So I was in community college delivering pizzas. I listened to, the fantasy footballers, listened to you, some of the more mainstream stuff. I was genuinely soaking up all the fantasy football content I could consume on my pizzeria routes. And then I was just like, you know what? I'll make videos. I'll do this. And it's been fun. And the full circle part that I was trying to say was my first video that really did well, because it's discouraging at first, man. You put these videos on YouTube. I was posting them on Reddit. I'm banned on r/fantasy football for self-promotion. I would just be like, yo, check this video out. Dude, if I talked about like Joe Mixon on the Bengals, I'd put it in the Bengals Reddit and say, hey guys, like I'm talking about your running back. Like, and it didn't help. That was very dumb by me, but I was just like trying to get any exposure I could. But then Rob Saleh got hired by the Jets, and it wasn't even a fantasy football video. I just gave my Jets takes. I was just like, all right, Rob Saleh's hired. I did like a little Jets mock draft at the end. And I remember I was door dashing at the time, and I like pull into like a Taco Bell, and it's like the first video that's like actually doing well. I could see the numbers go up, and it kind of just fueled me from there. And I just kept on making videos and sticking with it. And then like really the big crossroads was like after community college, should I go to a 4-year? I'm very lucky that my mom is very cool, and that she's very understanding of the whole thing. And she's like, you know what, like if you want to try it for a year, you can. This was probably like pre 10,000 subscribers. And I've just been making videos ever since. So yeah, it's very cool. I'm very lucky. I don't really sit back and, take it all in or whatever. But yeah.
I mean, that perspective though is important to be able to realize that like, oh, look, I did X, Y, and Z. I did all these things. It's not just the end result. I think a lot of people just see the end result and they're like, oh, you're so lucky that you're, and yeah, like, I'm incredibly grateful to be able to do this every day. Are you kidding me? It's this game fantasy football is amazing. And I get to talk about it and analyze it and study it and like dig into numbers, which I love, for a living, and support my family doing it. It's amazing, right? But like at the same time, there's a lot that you did and there's a lot of risks that you had to take, in order to get to that point. I also like the point of like the writing stuff. I really, really think that, back when I started, it was just like you have to write columns. And then that leads to maybe you get in front of a camera, maybe you do some stuff on TV or something like that. But it was never, YouTube wasn't nearly what it is today. I remember back in the day, like I don't think I've ever shared this on a podcast before. So I remember way back in the day, it was my senior year of high school. I grew up in Pittsburgh. I'm not nearly as big of a Steelers fan anymore, but I was a diehard to the way you are with the Jets Steelers fan. And I still love the Steelers, don't get me wrong, just not to the same degree that it was back then. And it was the year that they beat the Seahawks in the Super Bowl. It was my senior year of high school, to age myself, right? And I made like this is before like people really did a lot with video and like knew how to make cool edits and stuff like that. And I put together, it was like to the Pirates of the Caribbean music. And I put together this like really intense, emotional, like slideshow type video, right? And the video, I used to do web design growing up. Like that was my like summertime job and stuff in high school. Again, pre like WordPress and easier ways to create websites. And I had built my dad's business website, right? And his, it was like kind of like a side hustle thing that he had. And I uploaded the Windows Movie Video Maker video to his server, and it crashed. And it was my first and that was before, it literally happened like right before YouTube, like became a thing. And I always think to myself, like, I wonder if I had this on YouTube, because it was around the time when YouTube like kind of just started. I wonder if like my whole trajectory of my career and how I, like if I was more into that side of things or got more into that side of things, if things would have hit that way for YouTube. But yeah, man, I think it's just really important. I mean, this is kind of a long-winded way of saying, like, I think it's just really important to like focus in on the cool stuff that you can do and that that you want to do and that you're good at doing, as opposed to like forcing the issue of like, you got to write. To me, writing is more so to help you out to understand arguments and to understand how to break down an argument. Like, I think that can be beneficial, but people don't have to write these days in order to be an analyst and to be doing this stuff.
Yeah, I agree. Where it was kind of like of the past, and also I did want to add in there too of like, I was always very like the reason I went to community college and why like I call it chickening out of Rutgers. Like I knew from high school, like I literally like told my mom, I was like, I don't really want to go to school. That's like a whole other issue of like taking on all the debt and stuff. Especially, I love New Jersey, but the one thing about New Jersey is like they're not giving you any discounts. No one's giving you any discounts. I was gonna have to go to Rutgers full price. I was like lucky to get into business school, but then it's also like, hey, you have to now pay for the business school. There's no scholarship going on here. So like for me, I was also very entrepreneurial. Like I started it like just barely broke even, but I started back when like drop shipping was huge and it was like, making a website. I made this like homepage. I was like, it was, I don't even remember what the products were, but like it like barely broke even, but I was always trying to do that. So for me, and I do think that I want to word this correct way, because I think that you probably agree, but I don't know that you want to go straight to one of the big guys and start trying to write for them as where you can just start making, your own IP and business and doing your own thing. So for me, there was like, I wrote a couple articles. I was like, this is cool, but I want to do my own thing and build it here. But it really was luck, because I can't sit here and say like this was the plan that like, YouTube is this untapped market that I need to get into. But like I would say, one of my bigger inspirations as well, Nick Colano, kid from Jersey as well. He was somebody that was kind of getting buzz around then too. I was like, you know what? I think I can do this in a similar way with my own twist on it. So that's kind of just what it came down to. And I think I'm also I'm a decent writer, but I think I'm a better talker and presenter, if that makes sense. Yeah,
of course. Again, like it just goes back to like, and first, I do agree pretty strongly that even if you're doing things for another site, like, I started, I just did I had a blog of lateroundqb.com instead of lateround.com. And, I had some people writing with me, and it was a fun time for about a year and a half. But, you get out there, you're able to own something, you're able to do something. And then, hopefully you get discovered somewhere else if that's your plan, and then you can get a full-time job that way. But I would say to anyone out there in literally any industry, it doesn't have to be this one, is that if it's something where they're limiting you to be able to do side hustles, they're limiting you to not have and own your IP, try to get around that. Try to fix that. I mean, we're all doing this. Like don't just give in to whatever they want you to do, because there's a lot of upside whenever you have ownership of the things that you're actually creating. And, that was a big thing for me, and going out on my own too, a couple of years, or 3 years ago, is that this is no shade to FanDuel, no shade to NumberFire at all. They were both amazing places to work, great people. It's just, this is the way that a lot of bigger companies operate, is that, you don't have that kind of like ownership and freedom, to do that kind of stuff. And, I just said to myself, it's about time that I need to do this on my own and have this IP, because, I think I can do a little bit more with it. But yeah, it's cool to hear that story, man. And just I love hearing people, like, even the failures, like you talking about like all these like random side things you do. I can't even tell you how many like random affiliate websites I would build, and like how many terrible ideas I came up with and built websites for and stuff. And like, no one needs to know that, and the stupid ideas that they were, but they're all building blocks. Like, as you're just like 3 people visit a website and you're like, okay, this didn't work. All right, on to the next thing. And then finally you find something that you're both passionate about and you can do. And I think that's where, great content really comes from.
And you want to know something funny? It just made me think of it. It wasn't my summer job. I wasn't making quite enough money to be called a summer job, but probably the year before I started like making content and like COVID and everything, I put up a listing on Fiverr where for like $10 I would draft your fantasy football team. And I did that amazing. For probably like 20 people. I had like a VIP where if you pay me like 50, I'll run the team for you. I ended up like helping some dude win his work league or whatever. So that was like a very, like probably put like $200 in my pocket as like an 18-year-old, but was very fun. And I, at that point in time, there wasn't an underdog to like, there was like, there was draft like back in the day and stuff like that. But, I'd be down to just hop in, draft somebody's work league and just see what that's like. 18-year-olds not really doing anything during the summer. So yeah, like all of those side gigs and like just trying to figure it, like just do it. You know what I mean? Like you just sort of have to figure out what's going on. And I always refer back to, man, like I'm genuinely so thankful that for as many people watch my videos, they don't just like go to the home tab, click oldest, and then see like my first ever video I ever made. Like, oh my God, I am brutal on camera. It took me probably like 50 videos to actually like find my voice. And I've talked to Nick about it before, but and I think, and I've heard this from stand-up guys as well. I'm a huge Shane Gillis fan, but he's even been on record saying that he emulated and copied Louis C.K. when he first started out. If you go back to my first like 25 videos, it's an off-brand Nick Ercolano for sure. It's very bad. But that's what it's about, and he's very cool about it as well. I used to be a little shy around Nick, thinking that he, like this guy's probably stealing my whole flow, but he has his own platform that he could really care less what anyone's doing. But in your own head, you're like, man, like my first 35 videos are pretty rough to go back and watch, but it is all just part of that process.
Yeah, man, that's a sign that you're getting better, right? Like, I don't want anyone to go back and listen to these shows, to Lay Around podcast episodes from like, back in like 2017 when I started this thing. It's legitimately horrible. I would do videos for Number Fire for like the NCAA tournament, like March Madness and stuff.
Hell yeah.
And my cadence, my appearance, and like the way it is legitimately like high school TV class level stuff. Like it's just horrific. But that's a sign that you're getting better. Like it's not like you're saying and doing anything stupid. You're just inexperienced in doing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a whole. I think that's the other thing about video as well, is it can be so daunting. That's what I'll say to other people as well. How we're kind of saying, like writing school and everything, but I do think the way that everything's trending is video. Like you're even seeing the biggest podcasts, late round trying to get stuff on YouTube. Even like Pardon My Take is like trying to get like a huge presence on YouTube and all these podcasts. It's like there is this barrier to entry of like getting over the fear of being on camera. And then also I hear a lot of my buddies, and it doesn't annoy me, but it's a little sad to hear when, you'll have a buddy who has an idea for a podcast where it's like, and at this point, no one has a fresh idea for podcasts. Maybe like 4 years ago, I had a buddy saying like, oh, I'd love to get like me and a couple buddies and we talk like basketball. But there's like, oh, but I want this mic and I want this camera and everything. When my first 50 videos as well, I think it's important noting is like, I literally just put my phone on a mount and like a little like baby mic and just like ran off of that. Like you can go like we talked about kind of like, the presentation of all this. If you have to start on webcam and a snowball mic, you absolutely can.
Yeah. Of course. And again, that was not to like say if someone is doing that it's bad. Yeah. It's just more so that you can tell whenever there's a difference in quality of mic,
just get the reps in
and stuff like that. Yeah, you got to get the reps in. Yeah, 100%. I feel like everyone now I wonder what percent of the population has a podcast these days.
Big percent.
It's
I had like a history teacher who had like a history of like New Jersey podcast where he's talking about like Revolutionary War and what was going on in the Rockaway River down in Jersey. Yeah. It's like everyone's got something.
Yeah. So how would you describe yourself then as an analyst? Like, was there aside from just passion for the game, was there like a reason where you're like, oh, I can offer this up. I'm really good at watching film. I'm really good at analyzing data. Was that part of your consideration, or was it just more so, I'm analyzing it this way, I'm going to present it to people, but what is that way? Like, how would you describe that?
For me, I've always been a huge numbers guy. Like I was somebody, and it's not like I didn't get into Yale. I got into Rutgers Business School, but I didn't, sure. I didn't study very much in high school or college. But when it came to math and everything, I could just show up on the day of the test and get like an A, and do very well. SAT, all of that. So I'm very good with like math, numbers. I love numbers. Like, and that's what spoke to me about the Late Round podcast, and then also, Player Profiler back in the day when Breakout Age was like this new thing, and like Speed Score, and I'm trying to think of the other stuff. I think I said Breakout
Dominator.
Age. Dominator and all these things. And that was fascinating at the time. And it led to some like very pointless debates between like, Calvin Ridley and DJ Moore. And, Calvin Ridley's this old breakout from Bama, and DJ Moore is like this analytics darling. And that was all very fun. And, you know, your Zap score model is very cool to look at as well. So that's really that's really my angle, is the numbers element. I'm looking at the numbers. Like, everything to me makes sense in a spreadsheet. Like, I have spreadsheets. I have, you know, everything that I could possibly need. Like, every video that I do, I'm using some sort of spreadsheet. But I will say, like, I do have a bit that I sort of run with that. Like, I don't watch the games. I watch the games. I love football. I watch all of it. Mm-hmm. But my issue, I don't trust my eyes, and I don't trust many people's eyes, because if you asked me, and I think that you would agree, as someone, I think maybe the same conference as Pitt at the time, like, I would have told you Tavon Austin would have been a Hall of Famer, man. You know what I mean? Yeah. You know, I would have told you Tavon Austin would have been the best ever. I would have told you that Justin Blackmon would have been the best ever. I would have told you Tim Tebow was going to win a Super Bowl with the Broncos. So, like, these guys that I loved watching, you know, like guys like Charlie Ward, where they were just like monsters in college, it doesn't always pan out. Like, the eye test doesn't always work out. So I don't trust it as much. And I do like to lean on the numbers, but I have starting to merge them where, like, I don't think A.D. Mitchell is someone that popped on a lot of models, but when you look into, you know, some teammate score stuff, which you can kind of say models, but, you know, like, there are certain film guys I do love, you know, like I like Lance Zierlein is one of them. Yeah. There's a bunch of guys that I kind of lean on. And then, of course, you know, the number, I'm sure you say this as well, but the numbers guys, you know, well, draft capital is kind of film as well. So, that's right. You know, all of that. So much more numbers driven. But as I get deeper and deeper into this, and we see, you know, because the other side, I don't trust my eyes. The other side, I would have told you Rashad Bateman, you know, would have been sick by now. You know, he's coming up here. He's coming up here, but not to the degree that we thought on draft day. So, I think the more you do this and the more you get humbled by these guys you liked, the more you start to merge both.
That's what I was about to say, is that exact word. I mean, like, I see a lot of, like, fresh analysts go out on social, and they are so bold with what they're saying based on the data that they're analyzing and all that kind of stuff. And I always just sit back and I'm like, you're going to get humbled, man. Like it's going to happen. It comes for everybody. This game has a lot of unpredictability. There's a lot of variance involved. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's also, you know, people listen to me, like, when I first started this podcast, for years, like for 3 straight years, I was wrong about Derrick Henry. And then finally I'm like, I'm done trying to say that he is an outlier, and you're only going to get, like, he's a Hall of Fame once in a generation type player, but it happened, you know, like, this is the way that it's going down. And so it's been nice, you know, especially this year, it's been nice that I didn't fade him, and I am able to enjoy what he's doing in Baltimore. But, you know, you just get humbled by a certain kind of analysis and a certain process, and you adjust that process, not just based on one outcome, but you just open your mind to realize that there are many ways that things can go down, and many ways that these results can form. And I do think that, you know, as you realize that, you start to say, oh, maybe my original process of only looking at spreadsheets and, you know, only looking at, like, oh, no running back with a sub 10% target share could possibly be a top 6 running back in fantasy. You just start to realize that, you know, okay, go watch the dude, go look at what he's doing, and everything changes, you know, with your analysis. So I think a lot of people eventually get to that point. Let's talk. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, I wish I followed you on the Derrick Henry thing. I was drafting him in best ball. You know, 3rd round in best ball, but middle of the second on high stakes, and home leagues was tough. And I will say too, I lean on other people as well. And I consider, you know, Evan Silva one of the more, like, old school running back dudes. And he wasn't even high on the big dog this year, man. So that's, I'm not blaming Evan Silva for my own analysis. I'm just saying that even the very hardcore RB bros, they even had their concerns this year. But yeah, I wish I just, you know, was on the middle of the IQ chart, or on the end of the IQ chart.
I don't want to say I was high on him. It was more so
if you were just league average, you're fine.
Yeah, I had him. My thing, because I did Becoming a Best Ball Bro, the series over the offseason.
You can see how things are extreme over there.
Yeah, it's wild. But, like, my take during the offseason, or during the summer, was that I had Derrick Henry over Kyron Williams, which now it's like both of them are just good. Yeah. But it made me lean into Henry more. But the problem is that in my best ball portfolio, I'm still underweight on basically most running backs. That's been the problem for me from that perspective. My season long stuff, a little bit different. Like, and what's really funny, I know that we're kind of going all over the place here, but what's really funny is I built my underdog rankings for consumers, like for patrons and stuff like that. I built them off of my redraft rankings. So I had a formula that I would overlap on top of my redraft rankings that would then adjust for the insane market that was on Underdog with the wide receiver heavy stuff and all that kind of thing. And so my rankings technically skewed more running back heavy than what the market was doing on Underdog. And so I think a lot of patrons are pleased with that. But I myself, going through the drafts and doing so many of them and talking to so many winners and good analysts with Best Ball, I still went too wide receiver heavy in those. So I'm just crossing my fingers that I'll be around league or around neutral EV from an advance rate perspective. It's not like horrific right now, but I'm in like that 5 to 7% range with a lot of like the Barclays and the Henrys and stuff like that. And that's where, if you're below market a little bit, it's a little bit scary.
Yeah, I got they say over on Over's Edge channel, the 4% blanket where you can just you get 4%. Exactly. That's what I have on Derrick Henry and Underdog, but then it does sting. Like I do a bunch of high stakes. Like some of my favorite content to make during the offseason is I'll stream every day from August 1st through kickoff, which is a lot, but I also, don't have a kid and wife and family that depend on me. Yeah. So those are always super, super fun, but I don't have Derrick Henry in any of those. I'm kicking myself about it, but it is what it is. I was also going to say too, I know that we're going to talk more, micro on this week and stuff, but it's going to be fascinating kind of how this offseason talks about the season just through the lens of like everything that this last decade data wise has told us in terms of, running back injuries, the running back age stuff in terms of, because we, Jonathan Taylor's hurt, but Derrick Henry and Saquon are balling out, and then all the wide receivers are getting hurt, and then people are going to overreact, and we're going to go back to 2015 this offseason where we get 10 running backs in the first round, and it's going to be a lot of fun, I think.
Yeah, I'm really excited for it. I mean, I have a lot of like surface level thoughts, at least, of like, I think that we always, like, I talk about this in my draft guide every year, where there is a very clear reaction to the previous season results in the market every year. We see it now. Tight end had happened this year where tight ends were going so much later. So I'm like, hey, I'm going to lean into some of these early round tight ends. I think it's coming to fruition a little bit more than what it did to start the year. Cause like Trey McBride seeing good target shares, Travis Kelce seeing good target shares now that Rashee Rice is out. It's just that we knew there were going to be some busts, and we're seeing that now with like a Sam Laporta, Mark Andrews to some degree. I mean, I know that he's come on, or like a Dalton Kincaid. We knew there were going to be some busts. The whole point was that we're throwing darts to see if we get the guy that ends up, giving you that crazy edge. But like we see it all the time where like the most obvious year was in the 2015 to 2016 season.
Freeman, right?
Yeah, the Devontae Freeman year, right? Where running back, 0 RB was awesome that year. Devontae Freeman was the RB1, and he didn't score many points at all as the RB1. And then what happened the following year? Well, running backs fell in drafts because people were afraid to draft running backs, and then the position bounced back. And I talk about that every year in the draft guide. I wish I would have been, in hindsight, more proactive in letting people know that it was fine to draft a running back in the first couple rounds. Like, I'm a very, very big proponent of hero RB, like a very, very big one, right? But I think that, so, I'm not really upset about like how my analysis approached, the early round running backs or anything like that. I think the biggest change for me, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, is the dead zone stuff, where I tweeted about this. I made a thread after week 1. But even in the draft guide, I had talked about how the running back dead zone this year didn't have many stereotypical running back dead zone running backs. There were a lot of guys in the zone who had good receiving profiles, who had good, historical production, who really fit a lot of the things that I care about from a trend perspective in the dead zone. And I didn't, and I wrote it off a little bit too much. I didn't totally write it off, but I wrote it off more than I should have, And I think what I've realized through all of that, and again, this goes back to the thread that I had created after week 1, and you guys can go read it, but it made me realize that I don't think the dead zone is actually a dead zone. I think it's an archetype zone. It's just that it just so happens that these clear, obvious Zamir White type profiles fall into this RB2 range very frequently. I think the logic behind it of, people are reaching for these guys because of projected volume and not because of talent, all of that still applies. But I think it's one of those things where like there are going to be instances like we see this year where those types of running backs aren't littering that RB2 range. And maybe it's going to be because we get smarter, or maybe it's just the way that the running back position kind of shakes out in that given year. I think it might change a little bit. But I do think there were some obvious running back dead zone running backs this year, but I do think that it really comes down to the fact that when we talk about it, I think it's just an archetype thing more than anything else.
I think you're right. I also think a big driver, which is kind of funny, is the 2017 draft class, man. Like, they won't
That's
quit.
true.
Mixon, Kamara, Aaron Jones, James Conner, all these guys. What made running back this like golden era for a second is now on the back end of their careers. And as we know from like Adam Harstad stuff and everything, where it's kind of a cliff where like, you have this percent chance of hitting 0, but if they don't, then we all of a sudden have these running backs screaming from round 6 on those like top tier type of guys as tails. It's tough, man. The way that I played it this year was I was really only interested in James Cook and Kenneth Walker as like two guys that are younger. I was believing the coach speak stuff. Kenneth Walker is the one thing that I'm actually very happy that I was bullish on.
I thankfully flipped at the end of July.
Me too.
Thankfully, because I was the opposite throughout July, and I had way too much Sharps. I didn't think Sharps as like a best ball pick was really that bad, just because he at least had the handcuff upside and stuff. So like, I wasn't that upset about that. And fortunately, the way that the schedule works for drafts and fantasy football drafting, fortunately, all of our managed stuff usually just happens in August anyway. And so I was able to adjust, but thank God I adjusted, because Kenneth Walker got the role that, a lot of people were waiting for him to get.
Which is crazy, because as spreadsheet guys, we know like he had like, I think he had like 19 career touchdowns in his college career. Like, I don't have the data in front of me, but it has to be one of like the craziest jumps from, because like his comps coming out was like, Jonathan Taylor, Nick Chubb, like he can be this special runner without the receiving upside. And now he's getting this monster receiving work that's just crazy. So I'm always targeting those young profiles. And I do agree that I think in the past I've kind of been very default, like, okay, I'm avoiding the dead zone. I want to draft wide receivers here. And that kind of held true a little bit, like where there's some big hits like Rashee Rice and T. Higgins. Right. But it's going to be interesting to see how this landscape, smooths out. Because I think we're going to see some of these guys that like would be dead zone guys be like round 3-4 in terms of like, Mixon, Aaron Jones, these type of guys. And then are we going to see, because that was always the thing is like, yes, these profiles at running back were shaky, but like even if they weren't, the wide receiver hits here, like Cooper Kupp in his monster year. And you see across the board, even like back in the day, we're talking like Chris Godwin around 4, Metcalf year 2 breakout around there. So that's where it gets tough for me. But wide receiver got pushed up so much that you could almost say like this pocket of like round 5 to 6 was like very nice for running backs this year. But I don't know. It's going to be very tough. Like as you said, like, every year's going to be different. It's going to overreact to the last year. But I think you're right that in general, I think largely in part to best ball, like the dead zone's going to have to be modified in terms of like defining it / like, is it just an archetype thing? Because you're right. Like Zamir White was a very clear one. And a lot of these guys usually get injured more. I mean, I guess like Mixon went down, but we're seeing, Aaron Jones is looking great. James Conner's looking fine.
Yeah, it hasn't happened. The injuries haven't happened. And I do want to say that, like, I'm not like a 0 RB bro per se. Like I implement it and I use it. And I think there's data that suggests that it's not a bad strategy in certain formats. But I do get a little bit tilted when people think that 0 RB is only about injury. When it's not only, it's about the fragility of the position, in that when there is an injury at the running back position, everyone else in your league is hurting when you're not getting when you're not the one drafting that running back. Whereas all the while, the backup running back is going to have more predictable production who's stepping in for that player. We see it every single week. Like, we know that we can at least get some production from one of the Colts backs while Jonathan Taylor's out, or some backup running back. We know that production can come. Meanwhile, we're sitting here. Imagine a world where like Chris Godwin and Mike Evans were playing running back, right? Like that caliber of player. Jalen McMillan would be going for 80% of people's free agent budget right now, right? Like, and instead, he's like a 20% type in a home league, a 15% type pickup, because it's the wide receiver position where there's more volatility. It's not like it's this 1-to-1 replacement thing. And so I do think that people need to remember that, is that with 0 RB and a lot of these running back strategies, it's not just about them getting hurt, which I haven't looked at the data and I won't do it until the end of the season. Maybe one of the Twitter docs have done it in more detail, or maybe you have, but I would assume that this is going to look like an outlier year, at least so far, the way the first half of the season has gone. It's been an outlier year with earlier round wide receivers, getting banged up, and then early round running backs and mid round running backs just not. I mean, they've been relatively healthy.
Yeah, and it's been, I'm a proponent of zero RB, and I will say as well, like as we touched on earlier, where like my first video that did well was a Jets Robert Saleh video. My next video that actually like did very well as well was a zero RB video, where I felt like on YouTube at the time, this is like, 2021.
Yeah.
You got the counselor out there saying, don't go zero RB, you idiots, the sheepsis or whatever. So he's called me out in like zero RB video. He's like, you're doing damn zero RB. It's like, all right, whatever, I get it. Yeah. But so like it was such a frowned upon thing. And then you'd have analysts doing a zero RB tutorial where they would start, 3 wide receivers, not fill the flex spot, and then sleepwalk through the dead zone to fill the running back spots. And it's no, do not do this. So I made that video. And it was very funny, like in the offseason, like drafting these teams. I'll do like one or two solo main events, which is high pressure. I'm streaming it's like a few hundred people. And I'm sitting there, I'm debating between Brian Thomas Jr. and Raheem Mostert. I take Brian Thomas Jr. I'm like, look, you gotta go extreme. Did it take some balls to do it when I already have wide receivers through the flex, plus maybe one before taking Brian Thomas? But you got to, push it to the extreme. The issue is this year is, like you said, wide receivers are getting hurt. But if you do zero RB correctly, and I imagine when you talk about hero RB, there's a lot of zero RB in there as well, where you might even be taking a wide receiver onto your bench before your RB2. Right. And I do wonder how this is going to shake out at the end of it, because the wide receiver injuries are bad for those builds, but then also you've built up the anti-fragility to have, like, I lost Ayuk on a team that I'm co-managing with Jacob Sanderson, and like he wasn't even on our starting lineup last week. Like we're loaded. We have like T. Higgins and we have JSN, we have Shakir. So it's like a very interesting year where if you did go zero RB, you're hurting. And I'm looking here. This is the one that sucks. It's that there's not a single wide receiver right now averaging over 20 points per game, whereas there's 5 running backs right now. So that's what's going to like really sting. It's not so much the injuries. It's at the top end, these wide receivers aren't, producing.
Yeah, I still think we have time though for this to normalize a little bit. I'm hoping there's not running back injuries. We don't want injuries, but they're inevitable. They're like James Conner's missed time basically every year of his career. Stuff like that happens. And then to your point, like wide receivers, like the higher end guys, even Justin Jefferson to some degree, but like CeeDee Lamb's underperforming, to start the year. Amon-Ra St. Brown hasn't really been himself. There's reasons for all of that, but at the same time, it's like, do we expect it to be this bad moving forward? Like, do we expect CeeDee Lamb to average fewer than 16 PPR points per game? Probably not, and so I do think that things could really, really turn around, during the second half of the season. This is why, I like having these discussions where it's just like theory driven and just like, hey, yeah, this is kind of interesting that these things are happening. What I hate is when we're in the middle of the season and people are making declarative statements about what did and didn't happen. It's like, can we just wait till the season's over and then analyze what was smart, what wasn't smart from a draft strategy perspective, and at least be like logical about this instead of just, there's been 7 games played, like let's chill for just a second, because we understand that a couple big performances can really skew some of this data. Yeah.
And I'll be honest, that type of, I'm not going to call it analysis, but kind of the, the like rhetoric and the conversation around football is kind of due to my, TikTok and YouTube generation, where Davis Maddock has been talking about, where like, he's been on YouTube recently and like he's been not complaining, but just saying like there is very much like if you go live and you're doing a live stream, people are going to come in and like everything that has happened to this point is what has happened. It's 100%, in 100%, in 100 of 100 simulations, Derrick Henry goes crazy like this. And, Devon Achane gets a Tua injury and Nico Collins pulls his hamstring. Like there's so much that happens week to week. And then we're also, only 7 weeks in. I had a tweet, CeeDee Lamb last week, and now obviously it's not going to be 1-for-1 because not everything's going to happen, but he was at less points per game than he is right now up to his bye week. And then he averages 28.5 points per game after his bye last week. So there's so much left.
And what's funny is that last year, a huge reason why they were able to do what they did is because they became a little bit more pass heavy, but their schedule really opened up, and their schedule is opening up again this year. It's pretty strong rest of season. So yeah, like let's just chill with like the declarative, like this is how it's been. I think that the way that you phrase that is really important too, where people are like, Derrick Henry in 100 out of 100 times would be doing what he's doing right now. And it's like, I look at these tweets and stuff and the what people are saying, and they're like, can you imagine fading Derrick Henry this year? Or, the people who are like, imagine thinking that Blake Corum was going to take work from Kyron Williams. It's like, okay, there's a spectrum here, guys. Like, there was a possibility that some of these other outcomes could have happened. And if you're not recognizing these possibilities, you're a bad analyst, right? Like, you're telling on yourself by sending these messages to people saying after the fact, imagine thinking XYZ. And it's like, there's a lot of people who are smart and logical who did think that was a possibility. We're all just taking all of these different outcomes and we're trying to associate some sort of probability to those outcomes. If one of those outcomes hits, it doesn't change the probability to 100%.
Yeah. And like everything is seen through that lens when, of course, there's so many things that can happen in an entire season. And there's also the other aspect where even if you have the stone cold nuts in season, you still have to live through the gauntlet of the playoffs. Like last year, McCaffrey was so good. ESPN had a stat they dropped, which I don't know that I always trust them when they drop these stats, but Amon-Ra St. Brown and CeeDee Lamb were on more championship teams than McCaffrey was last year. Just because, the way that the schedule happened and that shootout in the last game where you could have if Derrick Henry has the highest playoff advancement rate, you could still lose your league, man. Like there's you could also almost argue, okay, the bye weeks are actually like a massive advantage. I'm not going to argue that, but all you got to do is sneak in. Just
get in the dance, man. Yeah.
Get in the dance, and like there's plenty of times where the 6 seed will win or 5 seed will win. So even if you have the weeks 1 through 14 nuts, it doesn't still ensure that you're going to win at all.
Yes, exactly. All right, I want to get to some player takes because I know that people, there's a lot of wide receiver stuff that happened this week. So I want to at least touch on some of that. DeAndre Hopkins goes to Kansas City. Where does that put him for you rest of season, and how do you think that impacts sort of the rest of the team there?
Man, the Hopkins one is so tough because he's been banged up all year. I saw some tweet from like an injury analyst that it seemed like his exact recovery to 100% hits like this week. So
that's good. Yeah.
Everything we've had to this point is pretty, I don't want to call it meaningless, but in the Tennessee offense, you can't really take anything seriously. I did my rest of season rankings yesterday. I landed at wide receiver 32. It's like a wide receiver 3. I know some people are going to get over their skis because I do get it. It's mouthwatering. DeAndre Hopkins, borderline Hall of Fame receiver, linking up with Mahomes. But this Chiefs offense, they're just not interested in like being the greatest show on turf anymore. They just want to play defense. They want to run the ball. Hopkins is old. I think that there's upside. Like there's a very wide range of outcomes where Hopkins comes in and they alter him to like this slot role, and he's like this big slot, kind of like late career Larry Fitzgerald, and he eats in a Rashee Rice role, and it's like a top 24 guy, or he's just another guy in this receiver room of like Kelsey's not even really getting home right now, even with the Rashee Rice injury. So I have a hard time. I think it's a very wide spectrum, and then sadly, I don't think it's great for Worthy. Like I loved Worthy coming out. I drafted a lot of Worthy. I was psyched after week 1. He has the 8 targets last week, only turned it into like 19 yards. You had the overthrow. I don't know. The hope was that Worthy could be more of a complete receiver, right? When he was coming out, that he wouldn't just run wind sprints all day. And I'm not going to call it him getting banished to that, but it seems like that's a little bit of it. I imagine they're bringing in Hopkins to, if he's not going to be in the slot, like I imagine we'll have a lot of Kelsey in the slot, we'll at least have Hopkins taking on a lot of the press man to kind of free up Worthy off the line a little bit, just because I don't know. There's like the viral tweet where he gets like, pushed into the next dimension off the line. Yeah. Like just absolutely brutal. So I don't know. I don't want to get too, like, I'm just done. I said this week that I think Mahomes might be droppable in fantasy football. Like if you're in a 10-man 5-bench league, dude, like you could drop Mahomes, man.
He's been horrible. Yeah.
He's hurting teams because you ddidn't have the balls last week to start Drake May over him.
Exactly.
Like this is Mahomes. Exactly. I can't. So I don't want to get, I don't want to get my heart broken. So I have him as like a mid wide receiver 3, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, that's where I think I was at like wide receiver 30. So I'm in a similar boat with them. The one thing that I am kind of excited about with Hopkins is from a Hopkins talent perspective. I think a lot of people look at what he did last year and they're like, oh, this dude's washed. He's old now. We don't want to have anything to do with him. His yards per route, like his per route run numbers were strong last year. He did 2.09 yards per route run rate, which is incredibly good. And I had him as a target in my draft guide until the injury happened, right?
Yep.
And a lot of that had to do with the fact that there is a trend when you look at middle round wide receivers, sort of in that like wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 range. And when they're older and they have the previous season efficiency that he had, they actually hit at a really good rate. Now, obviously, he's been hurt. But the interesting thing is, if you look at Tennessee right now and you look at what the wide receivers have done on a per route run basis, so obviously Hopkins' cumulative numbers don't look that great because, as you noted, he's been hurt. He's only running like half of the team's a route on like half of the team's dropbacks and stuff like that. But his yards per route run, I think, was 1.64 right now. Tyler Boyd is in second on that team at 1.04. I mean, like, Hopkins has been by far the best wide receiver in Tennessee. Now, granted, I know that Tyler Boyd is over the hill at this point, and he's just a slot guy. Calvin Ridley's Calvin Ridley, but I mean, it's still Calvin Ridley. Like, it's not like it's some random, it's not like we're talking Justin Watson here or something. And so like it's no shade to Watson there. That was a cheap shot on Justin Watson. But yeah, I mean, like I'm optimistic that something can form there. I think he'll probably play more X is my guess, just because he can, and they already have Kelsey kind of in that short middle of the field intermediate area. They can at least, use Hopkins on the outside on the perimeter and then let Worthy on the other side stretch the field a bit. But yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic. I don't think like a wide receiver one season is happening or something like that. Like I'm not getting that high, but I am cautiously optimistic that he's still a good enough player. Now, I mentioned Calvin Ridley. Do you think that Ridley is now back on your radar, or are you just like, screw the Titans, this is done?
Man, I was actually with you where I had one of my bigger takes I was like peddling on Twitter in like July I'm looking at here was like, I was taking Hopkins over Ridley, even though underdog ADP had them flipped. I didn't think that Ridley was going to come in and all of a sudden unseat Hopkins. And the injury happens, it's like, okay, have your way, Ridley. Even though one of my, I have a soft spot for Ridley. One of my first articles was like why Ridley's going to be this year's year 3 breakout like Chris Godwin was last year. And that was the year he smashed. Yeah. But if you objectively look at his numbers, I tweeted this out. This was July. In 4.5 seasons, I know that he had the weird gambling thing. All he has to really show for in 4.5 years is 2 1,000-yard seasons, 1 wide receiver 1 finish, 1 wide receiver 2 finish, only 1 year over 2 yards per out run. If you look at his entire career, Ridley, and like I get that some of this is getting pushed down by the Titans. I'm not even really gonna like Trevor Lawrence is a capable quarterback. Like his career yards per out run is 1.77. He only has 1 season over 2 yards per out run, and that was his 3rd year. Yeah, I just have a hard time saying that he is like some difference maker, So like for me, he's like in the wide receiver like 40s, and I think any volume he gets without Hopkins, I think the efficiency is just going to be brutal. So I'm not crazy interested, I guess. Yeah,
the interesting thing too is that like Brian Thomas is more or less playing the Calvin Ridley role in the Jags offense, and he's thriving. And so I understand like Brian Thomas is clearly a very talented player. I'm not trying to take anything, but like that's what we thought Ridley would be. Like Ridley's expected fantasy. This is why we look at things like expected fantasy points per game, because it was like a wide receiver 10 to 14, depending on your source last year, right? Like he was in a good position to score fantasy points. He just wasn't. And even now I get it. You watch the film and you see a lot of inefficiency, see some horrible passes. He has a low catchable target rate, like a very low catchable target rate. I understand all of that, but good wide receivers still do more than what Calvin Ridley's been doing. The only thing that I can really latch onto is now, like you said, probably we'll see like a pretty consistent 25% target share in the offense at this point, and the schedule opens up. The schedule is very, very good for Tennessee versus what they've faced to start the year. But yeah, man, it's hard to like really get excited about a guy who's just constantly disappointed over the last, since he came back from that suspension. So I'm mostly in agreement there.
Yeah, I'm looking now at my rest of the season rankings. I have him wide receiver 55.
Yeah, I mean, like, and it's not a crazy. I think I might be in like the 40, like high 40s or something like that. Like, it's not a crazy stance to have when you,
brutal,
especially when you like lay it out. Because people always come to me and they're like, "Why are you so low on Calvin Ridley?" And I'll be like, "Okay, where should I rank him then? Like who am I putting him over?" There's a lot of good wide receivers out there who have that like upside. Like let me ask you this: like Ladd McConkey or Calvin Ridley rest of season?
Oh, Ladd McConkey by a lot, man.
Yeah,
Ladd looked good.
Yeah, I think that Ladd looks great too. And so like that's a dilemma that people are probably like they'll see that and they're like,
Demario Douglas, man. Demario Douglas.
Sure,
he looks good.
Yeah, you can easily make that kind of. I'm trying to pull up mine right now just so that I can see where I would. How about what about like Darnell Mooney or Calvin Ridley?
I got Darnell Mooney. Darnell Mooney's balling, man.
Here's one. Here's a fun one. Ricky Pearsall or Calvin Ridley.
Give me the mystery box. I'm going.
I kind of want to go for the mystery box.
Give me the mystery box, dude.
Let's talk about that actually. Let's talk about Pearsall. Because we now have Ayuk and Debo's now banged up. Debo might go this weekend. We don't know at the time of this recording. But Ayuk obviously done for. I was kind of surprised that I got Pearsall in the number of leagues that I got Pearsall in, because I didn't think I was overly aggressive. I was going like, depending on my team, 20 to 40% fob, depending on, how deep the league was and stuff like that. I probably got him on like half of my rosters now. And I was kind of surprised that people weren't more aggressive. Do you think I was wrong in being aggressive, or do you think that there could be something there?
I think you're spot on, and I think it also speaks kind of volumes. Like, did the Zap score love Ricky Pearsall? I would say probably not a ton, right?
Yeah, it was more so. So the one thing that it does like is the versatility, right? So he had a lot of like rushing,
stuff.
Rushing production, stuff like that in his profile that did bump him up. I think objectively, because it was, what was that tier? It was him, like Xavier Legette, Jalen Polk, and Keon Coleman, right? Like that was kind of in the same. I know that like him and Legette went in the first round, but it was all fairly similar draft capital overall. He scored the best out of all of those guys. But all of those guys also had some red marks to their analytical profile. But I think he was like an 89 or something like that in the Zap model, which is not horrible. It's not like fantastic, but he at least had some of those versatile attributes. One of his comps was actually like Jaden Reed for Pearsall. That was more of like an objective model comp. I'm not saying that he's going to be like that, but that's what kind of got me excited about the fit, was that if you're going to have that kind of player, you want an offensive coordinator that comes from this tree in like a Kyle Shanahan, or like what we've seen in Green Bay with like Jaden Reed so far this year. That's what's gotten me excited. I think a lot of people just see Pearsall as like a 1-to-1 Ayuk replacement, but I think they can get pretty creative with him.
Yeah, I'm also very optimistic. I will say, I think like one of the bigger discussion points for more like home leagues was like Juwan Jennings or Ricky Pearsall. I would say Juwan Jennings just so because we've seen it before and whatever, but I'm with you that I'm very optimistic. I was just looking through. I have him on 6 teams now. I actually was a little smart. After he got activated, I just like put in a couple $1 bids on the Sunday roll through on FFPC. So I have him on like 3 of like 6 or 7 FFPC teams. I have a lot of them too, and it really is. It's less that like I don't really think I have much of him in Dynasty. It's less of like I think this player is very good take, and more of just like first round wide receiver mystery box. He has the runway to routes, and then we also have seen like you said with Jaden Reed, where last year I want to say in terms of top 24 wide receivers from weeks like 10 on, it's like Jaden Reed, it was Zay Flowers, it was I know like Addison was in the mix. Of course, you had Puka, Rashee Rice, so. Right. Ricky Pearsall has the opportunity. Like, we're going to start to see, of course, we have Brian Thomas at the top. We have, of course, Neighbors at the top. But we're going to see a couple of these guys start to scream up there as we get into the weeks that matter. And I think Pearsall could be that guy. Yeah, no, I'm totally agreement. Like, this is one of those things, what we were talking about before, where in the moment you're placing bets on upside and range of outcomes. And then after the fact, someone's going to say, if Ricky Pearsall fails, they're going to say, oh, it was so dumb that we did that because look at this result. And it's like, I get that, but there aren't many opportunities where you can get a first round, relatively decent wide receiving prospect who, yes, he has some red flags to his profile. Older prospect, his production profile really wasn't that robust. But again, if you look at what a lot of people who watch more film than us, they were very impressed by his route. They considered him the best route runner in the class. A lot of people did. And then also the versatility of that production. There were some things that you could like about his profile. Like I thought that he was a superior prospect to like a Legette, like I said, Jalen Polk. I thought he was better than Ladd McConkey was another one in that group where, you can make the argument either way, but I actually liked him more just as a player than McConkey, which in hindsight probably might be wrong, but I think that he's at least like, he was kind of in that conversation of, a player who could, be, if he got the opportunity, year one producer. And so I don't know, man, I'm intrigued by what we could see out of San Francisco. Yeah, me too. And I think old me would have been like, year 5 breakout, like I'm good, year 5 breakout, first round pick. Like I'm all good there. But, a guy who hasn't hit 1,000 receiving yards one time in college, but like you said, like I love I am a sucker for these. Like that's why this was not the selling point on Brock Bowers, but Brock Bowers had like 13 carries for like 200 yards and 5 touchdowns at Georgia. As like he could play running back if he wanted to. Ricky Pearsall's college production: 21 carries, 253 yards, 5 touchdowns on the ground. Like especially in a Shanahan offense, anyone that's just explosive with the ball in their hands, and like you said, when Matt Harmon has to rave about this guy and guys that I trust in the film circles, like, and he gets first round draft capital, I'm fine, putting my spreadsheets down, and saying, okay, I'm open to it. I actually drafted a lot of him in underdog. And like you said, with the whole, the season can only happen one way. I'll go to my grave. Jalen Polk was a fine underdog pick, man. Second round pick you could get in the, 12th, 13th round. Yeah. Sometimes that second round pick ends up being someone like Jaden Reed, or sometimes he ends up being, Jalen Polk, and he's brutal and 0.4 yards per out run. But, when you can take on that upside for like a 12th round ticket price, like you do that. When you can take on that upside for a 20% fab bid, you do that. So that's just kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, same. Since we're talking about it, do you have a lean with the Buccaneers and how that might play out? Are you approaching it in a pretty similar way where it's like, oh, you have a mystery box rookie wide receiver who, I thought McMillan looked pretty good as a prospect, all things considered, especially when you kind of layer on teammate score and kind of look at the context of where he got his production, how he got his production, all that kind of stuff. Are you one that leaned that way more than like the Sterling Shepard, Trey Palmer direction?
Yeah, I would say by a lot, and it really is just because, like, and this might be just a little bit too simple-minded, but very rarely you're going to see a guy like Sterling Shepard win leagues, Like, it would floor me if, like, 8th, 9th year Sterling Shepard off of, like, 2 major knee injuries and Achilles is, like
you could see, like, like, you could see a median outcome favor Sterling Shepard, but the high-end outcome would be bizarre. Right. And
I imagine both you and me have our teams built in a way where even if Sterling Shepard hits, he'll never really make my lineup in a redraft league. So I do prefer McMillan. It's a little bit tough with McMillan because now we have, and this is an interesting part about yards per out run, is that he is running routes versus Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. So that has to take into account to some degree, because I'm sitting here staring. One of my favorite things I do during the season is I do the rookie receiver report, where I just kind of track yards per out run, targets per out run, first downs per out run, and PFF grade every single week. And McMillan isn't popping at all. But again, like, I think he has a decent excuse built in. Then he gets banged up. He comes back. But you're right. Like, he's a fun prospect in that he's not going to pop off the page in like normal production stats, but like per game, per route, he looks pretty damn good next to Roma Dunze. And you'll hear guys like Gretsch say that he was like the second best receiver, even though he gets drafted after Polk. And to me, he was more interesting as kind of like this discount JSN type of guy, where he's like the slot receiver who has some juice to him and can do his thing. So I'm very much into him. The only scary part is that we have, X amount of routes in his sample, and he's at like 0.64 yards per out run and everything. But again, trying to give him some of the benefit of the doubt. And then also we saw after Evans got hurt how much they featured McMillan. He gets like 8 targets. He gets like a manufactured carry. Like, it seems that they like him. My only concern is I wish that they would fold on this, let's make him an outside receiver thing, and just put him in the slot. Because it seems like they're pretty set on Shepard in the slot with McMillan on the outside, which is a little bit problematic because I don't know. He's like playing out of position a little bit.
Yeah, he played 90% of his routes and ran 90% of his routes from the slot in college, and they've been using him in the slot on like 23% of them so far this year. So I think that's a big concern. Like I hope that what we see, because when they made the pick, I was a little bit confused because they were talking about using Godwin more in the slot, and McMillan to me profiled as almost like a pure slot guy, right? Like one of his comps for me was actually Amon-Ra St. Brown, because, and again, I know that I'm like talking about these like Jaden Reed for Pearsall. It just so happens that these 2 wide receivers had one really interesting comp, and those were the interesting comps. But the thing, like, I hope that similar to ARSB, they're able to throw McMillan both inside out. Like they rotate Shepard to the outs, because Sterling Shepard even, like, he started his career as a slot guy, but he's actually played on the outside pretty frequently over the last like 5 years of his career when he's been healthy. So I'm hoping that they at least get a little creative there. I'm intrigued though by McMillan. Would you, let me ask you this on the spot, would you be taking McMillan or Pearsall? Like, which one did you put more fob towards this week?
Pearsall for me, just because of offensive environment and then like also draft capital, where I think it's close. Like I had them, like I'll do a waiver wire article where I'd like have fab recommendations. They're like the same amount, but I just had him just a step ahead just because of the offense, the scoring, and then also I guess like the pedigree, and then also more the mystery box where again, I think that there's some factors, slot stuff, teammates, but we already have this sample of a pretty bad yards per out run. I don't mind betting on the mystery box, but we also, I don't know how much like a bullet wound, like we don't know how much that's still affecting Pearsall, which I think is like kind of worth, mentioning as well. Like, but
dude got shot.
Yeah, he literally got shot, lived to tell the tale, wearing his Rolex onto the ambulance. Very, just one of those stories in the NFL, man. But yeah, like I'm just into it with Pearsall. It is tough. Shanahan is so hit or miss with these guys where it's like, this is a Shanahan guy. Of course, he hits on Ayuk, he hits on Debo. Then we're looking at like, Dante Pettis, and you're looking at, Joe Williams. And sometimes you put the stamp on guys who aren't all that great. But I'm optimistic. There's smart people out there that liked him a lot coming out. So I'm optimistic. The 49ers also back against the wall. Like they aren't the Chiefs where they can like, they have this, ground and pound play defense. Like they need to get after it and they need to win games right now. So I am excited. And also like, Jennings is still like dealing with this injury as well. So we could see another week where Pearsall leads the team in routes, leads the team in targets and everything. And at least there's still, there's the window dressing of the run game to worry about. And there's the tight end Kittle to worry about, where if the Bucs passing game is just simply Jalen McMillan, Sterling Shepard, and Trey Palmer, they're kind of in trouble. I know, the run game has been better recently, but they might stack the box, dare these receivers to beat your corners. So again, I think they're both fine waiver ads, but yeah, I'll take Pearsall.
I also threw a ton of darts at Jacob Cowing too. I should throw that out there. Yeah, I'm only because I'm gonna sound like
he's a fun spreadsheet guy.
Yeah, he is. I'm gonna sound like my prospect model is only giving favorable comps, but I promise if you look at the prospect guide, you will not only see you will see the weirdest names that you forgot existed when you look at some of these comps. But one of if there was a Tank Dell in this class, to me it was Jacob Cowing. So
I like that call.
I do think that there's at least, and again, this is an offense, San Francisco, and a coach in Kyle Shanahan that I don't think would be afraid to use the lower draft capital player if that's where the talent is leaning and that's where things are leaning. So I'm in some deeper leagues, 14 teamers, stuff like that, or just 12 teamers with relatively deep benches. I got Cowing in just as many of my leagues as Pearsall, just to say, look, we don't know how things are going to shake out. We don't know exactly what this is going to look like. Cowing only ran like 8 routes last week, but Jennings banged up, like you said. What if there's a scenario where Jennings doesn't go this weekend and Cowing really shows up? Or what if there's a scenario where Cowing just plays well because he gets 10 to 15 routes in a game and just balls out, during that time frame and just slowly, gets more and more of a workload. But I'm not expecting that much, but I do think he's at least an interesting name to throw out there.
I agree. Honestly, a little bit of FOMO that I didn't think of that, but he made like one play where he looked really good. I have heard, and I want to preface this by saying it's not pouring cold water, because I think that now they're down so many weapons they can't afford to have this. Essentially, what I heard, I don't know if it was on the broadcast or just somebody else that is more film oriented, pretty much saying that like the 49ers like the receivers to be big to run block downfield, which makes sense. And Cowing smaller, but if they run into this game this week with no Jennings and Cowing's the only one making plays, he's going to be on the field. And he's also, like you said, good spreadsheet guy. Like my model spit out a better grade for Cowing than McMillan, who we're talking about here as well. Like the spreadsheets are going to love him. He was a fun prospect where he would have probably gone higher. He had like a weird transfer thing that kind of threw him off, and whether playing inside the slot, outside the slot, like he had a very weird career. You can look at like inside the slot, outside the slot, high A dot, low A dot. Like he played everywhere, inside out. Sometimes to his detriment as well to his profile, but he's a fun name to shout. And I did want to. I wanted to ask because I went into last night on FFPC leagues with zero intention of bidding for this player, and then Jacob Sanderson got in my ear, and now all of a sudden I have like 3 or 4 shares of Cedric Tillman. Is there any love for Cedric Tillman? Or Jameis Winston's going to be playing quarterback. He was a fun guy coming out of Tennessee. He's not like, the spreadsheets aren't going to love him, but he's like, size, speed. He had some like weird injury stuff. He did when they were on the field together. I think that he probably outproduced Jalen Hyatt or like a better yards per out run. So yeah, I've been Cedric Tillman pilled.
My only hesitation with Tillman is that he was atrocious last year.
Yeah.
On a per route basis. That's really my fear, but you look at what they've got. Like I talked about this on 15 transactions this week. It's like Jerry Jeudy, I think, has proven to us that he's just not a stud. Elijah Moore has been a disappointment since his rookie year. Sorry to your Jets fandom. And I mean, sure. Like I think that Tillman's fine to at least throw the dart at. I mean, he's a big body that is kind of a 1-to-1 replacement of what Amari can do kind of in that offense, but probably not as, I mean, I wouldn't assume nearly as good. I didn't mind him as a prospect. I didn't like him. I thought he was just fine where he was drafted. I thought Jalen Hyatt was more interesting as a prospect, but he had that really weird slot profile.
Tennessee has such a weird offense, man.
Yeah, they're just really, really hard to prospect, I think, even for guys who aren't doing it through production numbers and the stuff that we're looking at. I mean, it's still a difficult team to look at because we don't know how much of this is like just totally manufactured or how much of it is actually the guy winning. And then unfortunately, like a guy like Hyatt, you go and he goes to the NFL and he doesn't have a slot role because they have their slot merchant and Wan'Dale Robinson there in New York. So I mean, I think Tillman's fine. I would prefer the other guys that we've been talking about, but too. I think that like, and I'd prefer Tillman probably over Cowing. You know, I think that there's a more immediate role there. But yeah, I threw some darts his way this week.
Yeah, I threw a couple at him, like pretty much as like the backup bid. But man, I was just looking now, like not a single Browns receiver had over 1 yards per out run on the entire season. Like Jameis is going to be fun. I'm very excited for it.
I hope, man. I hope it'd be great. All right, I got one more question before I let you go. I know we had other stuff that we were going to talk about today, but I liked where the discussion went. That's usually how these Perspectives episodes go. Give me your favorite buy in fantasy football right now.
Man, this one's tough. I wrote a couple down. I think I'll put as number one, Deebo Samuel is probably the number one. And I know it's obvious, but I do wonder, especially like if he doesn't play this week with the pneumonia stuff, if there is a buy window. There was a Dwayne McFarland tweet I saw that I thought was pretty good in terms of Deebo, where he has like in games without Ayuk, he just balls out is pretty much what it is, where he had like a 38 yards targets per out run, 38% when Ayuk's not on the field. And I just want pieces of this offense. Like we said, like I do think that these guys are going to be, coming from behind, or maybe not coming from behind, but like they need to win games. There's no messing around. All right, I found he has a 4.88 yards per out run on the field without Ayuk since 2021. So that's a pretty decent sample. 41% of the air yards, 38% of the targets. So like, and on top of that, we have the McCaffrey injury. So he's getting carries on top of it. Like Deebo, when we talk about who can kind of save the wide receiver position right now, it is Deebo. I know that he's more of a luxury buy. Like you're not going to be able to like buy Deebo for chips, but I think especially if there's an owner out there who's like maybe 2-5, and if Deebo can't go this week, or if it's like he has pneumonia and he can't play snaps and he's not really trusted in a starting lineup this week, go tap him on the shoulder and go see what you can get for him.
People might not realize this, but when we were drafting throughout the summer on Underdog, Deebo at one point when the rumors were really strong about Ayuk leaving, Deebo was a 1-2 turn pick, like pretty consistently. Like he was going in Garrett Wilson range. So that gives you an idea of sort of what that upside looks like, for Deebo without Ayuk here. So I like that call out a lot. All right, man, it's been a pleasure. Love chopping it up with you every time we get to. Let everyone know where they can find you, what you're working on, all that good stuff. Yeah,
happy to be on. Cool full circle moment as someone that listened to this show, while I was delivering pizzas for a while.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, you can follow me at Ron Stewart _ on Twitter. You can follow me Ron Stewart on YouTube, just Ron Stewart. And I put out weekly content. I got like 10 lessons learned where I'll break down the entire Sunday. I have my waiver wire video, some trade targets, some sneaky starts where I kind of look into like just the most disgusting starts of all time and tell you, if you're down bad, these are guys that you can put in your lineup. So that's really what I got going on. All on YouTube, Ron Stewart. Follow me there. Excited for the offseason. Like Dynasty is going to be fun. Everything is out in front of us. So yeah, Ron Stewart on YouTube. And I appreciate you having me on.
Of course, man. Of course. You guys can follow my stuff over on lateround.com, Twitter at lateroundqb. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/@lateroundff. Thanks for listening, everyone. Greatly appreciated as always. I got to end it this way, though. Thanks for tuning in.